The lobby smelled like fresh coffee and polished marble. Alicia Carter stood near the elevator, holding a thin leather folder against her chest. Across the room, two men in dark suits were whispering. One of them glanced at her, then leaned toward the other. "Interviews for the leadership role, right?" The other man nodded. The first man frowned slightly. "Interesting choice." Alicia heard it. She had learned to hear those comments even when people tried to hide them. She kept her face calm. The receptionist smiled politely. "Ms. Carter? Mr. Whitmore is ready for you." Alicia nodded. Her heels tapped softly as she walked down the long hallway. Framed awards covered the walls. Leadership excellence, corporate integrity, employee trust. The door at the end opened. Inside sat Daniel Whitmore, Regional Operations Director. Gray hair, sharp suit, cold eyes. He didn't stand, just pointed to the chair. "Sit." Alicia sat. Whitmore skimmed her resume, then leaned back. "You've got strong credentials." Alicia smiled politely. "Thank you." Whitmore tapped his pen slowly. "But leadership," he said, tilting his head, "isn't just about qualifications." Alicia waited. Whitmore studied her face, then said quietly, "Some people simply don't command authority." Silence filled the room. Alicia felt the weight behind the words. She kept her voice steady. "Can you explain what you mean?" Whitmore smiled. "Not kindly. Let's be honest." He slid her resume across the desk. "People like you usually work better taking direction." The air in the room turned heavy. Alicia stared at him. Whitmore leaned forward. "And leadership here," he added softly, "requires a different presence." Alicia slowly closed the folder in her lap. Whitmore thought the interview was over. But Alicia was suddenly very interested. Because tomorrow morning, Whitmore would walk into a boardroom and discover something that would make this conversation very expensive. The hallway outside the interview room felt colder than the rest of the building. Alicia Carter noticed small things when she was nervous. The hum of the air conditioner, the echo of footsteps, the receptionist typing too loudly. "Mr. Whitmore will see you now." Alicia stood. "Thank you." She walked down the corridor slowly. Glass walls, polished floors, corporate success framed on every wall, photos of executives shaking hands, awards for leadership, integrity, trust. The door at the end of the hallway opened. A man's voice came from inside. "Come in." Alicia stepped inside the office. Daniel Whitmore sat behind a large wooden desk. He didn't stand, just glanced up briefly. "You're Alicia Carter." "Yes." "Sit." Alicia sat across from him. Whitmore flipped open her resume. The pages rustled quietly. "MBA from Northwestern." "Yes." "Operations manager at 3 different firms." "That's correct." Whitmore nodded slowly. 8 years leadership experience. Alicia smiled slightly. "Yes." Whitmore closed the resume, then leaned back in his chair. Silence stretched between them. Finally he said, "You're clearly qualified on paper." Alicia waited. "But leadership isn't just about qualifications." His eyes studied her carefully. Alicia felt the tension but kept her voice calm. "What else would you say leadership requires?" Whitmore tapped his pen against the desk. "Presence." Another tap. "Authority." He tilted his head. "And confidence that others will naturally follow." Alicia nodded. "I've managed teams of 40 people." Whitmore shrugged slightly. "Managing isn't leading." Alicia leaned forward. "Can you clarify the difference?" Whitmore smiled faintly. Not warmly. "Leaders inspire respect immediately." His eyes lingered on her face. "People respond to them instinctively." Alicia understood the implication. Still, she asked, "And you believe I don't?" Whitmore spread his hands. "I'm saying leadership presence is difficult to measure." Alicia held his gaze. "Yet you seem confident measuring it now." Whitmore chuckled softly. "You're direct." "I try to be clear." Whitmore slid her resume back across the desk. "Let me put it another way." Alicia waited. Whitmore leaned forward. "Some personalities are more suited to supporting roles." The sentence landed like a stone. Alicia felt heat rising in her chest. But her voice stayed steady. "And you believe I have one of those personalities?" Whitmore shrugged. "I think you'd excel under strong leadership." Alicia stared at him. Whitmore continued casually. "Not everyone needs to lead." Silence filled the office. Alicia slowly closed the folder in her lap. Whitmore glanced at his watch. "I think we've covered everything." Alicia stood. So the position is already filled? Whitmore smiled politely. We're still reviewing candidates. But Whitmore met her eyes. I wouldn't expect a call. The words were calm. Certain. Final. Alicia nodded once. Thank you for your time. She turned toward the door. Whitmore added something behind her. You seem competent. Alicia paused. Whitmore continued. There are plenty of departments where someone like you could contribute. Someone like you. Alicia didn't respond. She walked out of the office. The hallway felt warmer now. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text message appeared on the screen. Margaret Liu. Board meeting confirmed. Merger announcement tomorrow morning. Your leadership appointment will be finalized. Alicia stopped walking. Employees passed her in the hallway. None of them noticed her smile. She looked back once toward Whitmore's office door. Then whispered quietly to herself. Tomorrow. Her voice was calm. Will be interesting. The cafe across the street from Northbridge was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Alicia Carter sat near the back corner, her leather folder resting on the table beside a cup of untouched coffee. She checked the time. 8:12 a.m. Right on schedule, the door opened. A woman stepped inside. Mid-50s. Calm posture. Sharp eyes. Margaret Liu, chairwoman of the Northbridge board. Margaret walked directly to Alicia's table. Alicia. Alicia stood. Good morning. They shook hands. Margaret sat down. You had the interview yesterday. Alicia nodded. Yes. Margaret studied her face. And? Alicia took a slow breath. It confirmed my concerns. Margaret folded her hands. Tell me. Alicia leaned back slightly. He didn't ask about strategy. Margaret waited. He didn't ask about leadership experience. A pause. He studied my face more than my resume. Margaret's expression tightened. And then? Alicia's voice stayed calm. He said leadership requires a certain presence. Margaret sighed quietly. That word again. Alicia nodded. Yes. Margaret leaned forward. Did he say anything explicit? No. But the message was clear. Margaret looked out the window. Cars moved slowly through the rain outside. We've received complaints before, Margaret said. Nothing proven. Alicia spoke carefully. People rarely complain when their careers are at risk. Margaret looked back at her. You applied for the job on purpose. Yes. Just to test him? Yes. Margaret shook her head slowly. You could have simply taken the executive position. Alicia shrugged slightly. Titles don't reveal culture. Margaret considered that. You wanted to see how he treated someone he believed had no power. Alicia nodded once. Exactly. The waiter passed by quietly. Neither of them touched their coffee. Margaret spoke again. The merger paperwork finalized last night. I saw the message. You officially become Executive Director of Regional Operations tomorrow morning. Alicia said nothing. Margaret watched her closely. You're calm. I expected this. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You expected Whitmore's behavior too? Alicia hesitated, then nodded. I've seen versions of it my whole career. Margaret's jaw tightened slightly. Subtle bias. Yes. Hard to prove. Yes. But easy to feel. Alicia met her eyes. Very easy. The cafe door opened again. Cold air drifted inside. Margaret lowered her voice. There's something else you should know. Alicia waited. Whitmore believes the merger only affects financial oversight. Alicia blinked. He doesn't know leadership will change. No. Margaret shook her head. We wanted to observe him one more day. Alicia's eyes narrowed slightly. You're testing him too. Margaret smiled faintly. You started the experiment. Silence sat between them. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Alicia finally spoke. Let me go back today. Margaret frowned slightly. As what? A candidate finishing paperwork. Margaret leaned back. That's risky. Why? If Whitmore suspects anything. He won't. Margaret studied her carefully. You're very sure. Alicia nodded. People like Whitmore never imagine someone they dismissed might outrank them. Margaret almost smiled. That confidence might be dangerous. Alicia's voice stayed steady. It's not confidence. What is it? Experience. Margaret sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, What exactly are you looking for today? Alicia answered immediately. Patterns. Meaning. How employees react to him. Margaret nodded slowly. And if you find what you suspect. Alicia's eyes moved to the rain outside. Then tomorrow's announcement will mean more than a leadership change. Margaret understood the implication. You're thinking about a full internal review. Yes. Margaret tapped her fingers lightly on the table. That could shake the company. Alicia looked back at her. Sometimes it should. The cafe grew quieter. Margaret exhaled slowly. Very well. She slid a small envelope across the table. Alicia opened it. Inside was a temporary visitor badge. Margaret spoke quietly. Use this today. Alicia nodded. Thank you. Margaret stood. One more thing. Alicia looked up. If Whitmore behaves the way you suspect. Alicia waited. Margaret's voice lowered. Tomorrow will be uncomfortable for him. Alicia closed the envelope. He already made it uncomfortable for himself. Margaret almost smiled. She turned to leave. Then paused. Alicia. Yes. Margaret looked directly at her. You understand what tomorrow might do to him. Alicia didn't hesitate. Yes. Margaret searched her face. And you're prepared for that? Alicia thought about Whitmore's words in the interview. People like you work better taking direction. Her voice stayed calm. He made his own decision yesterday. Margaret nodded slowly. Fair enough. She walked toward the door. The bell above it chimed as she left. Alicia stayed at the table a moment longer. She finished her coffee. Then stood. Through the cafe window, the tall Northbridge building loomed across the street. Cold. Polished. Powerful. Alicia slipped the visitor badge into her pocket. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from Margaret appeared. Board meeting, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Full executive team required. Alicia looked up at Whitmore's office windows high above the street. He was probably inside already. Confident. Comfortable. Certain the world worked the way he believed it did. Alicia stepped outside into the rain. As she crossed the street toward the building, one quiet thought passed through her mind. Whitmore believed yesterday had been a job interview. But today, the real evaluation had just begun. The Northbridge office floor was already busy when Alicia stepped out of the elevator. Phones ringing. Keyboards clicking. Low voices floating through the open workspace. No one looked up at first. Just another visitor, people assumed. Alicia clipped the temporary badge Margaret gave her onto her blazer. Visitor. She walked slowly through the rows of desks. Employees sat in neat cubicles. Most of them avoided eye contact. A few glanced up quickly, then back down at their screens. The air felt tight, like people were used to being careful. Alicia stopped beside a reception desk. A young woman looked up. Can I help you? Yes, Alicia said politely. Mr. Whitmore asked me to stop by today. The woman nodded. Oh, the interview candidate. Alicia smiled. That's right. The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. His office is down the hall. Thank you. As Alicia turned to walk away, the woman added quietly. Good luck. Alicia paused. Why would I need luck? The receptionist gave a small nervous laugh. You'll see. Alicia continued down the hallway. Whitmore's office door was open. He sat at his desk reviewing papers. He looked up when Alicia appeared. Oh! His eyebrows lifted slightly. You're still here. Alicia kept her voice neutral. You asked me to stop by today. Whitmore leaned back in his chair. I said HR might contact you. I was nearby. Whitmore studied her for a moment, then shrugged. Well, he gestured toward a chair. Since you're here. Alicia sat. Whitmore flipped through a stack of reports. Tell me something, Ms. Carter. Yes. You seem persistent. I believe in finishing things. Whitmore chuckled softly. Ambition can be useful. Alicia waited. Whitmore slid a folder across the desk. If you're serious about working here. Alicia looked down at the folder. What is this? Performance summaries. Alicia opened it. Employee productivity numbers. Department reports. Whitmore spoke casually. Sort those by department and highlight any inefficiencies. Alicia blinked once. That sounds like an analyst's task. Whitmore shrugged. You said you wanted experience. His voice carried a faint edge. Consider it a small test. Alicia closed the folder. You're asking an executive candidate to do entry-level analysis. Whitmore smiled slightly. I'm giving you an opportunity. Alicia held his gaze. Whitmore leaned forward. Leadership begins with humility. The message was clear. Do the work. Or walk away. Alicia nodded once. Very well. Whitmore looked satisfied. Good. He returned to his paperwork. Leave the report with my assistant when you're done. Alicia stood and carried the folder back to the open office area. Employees glanced up as she passed. She sat at an empty desk, opened the folder, started reading. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The data told a quiet story. Departments with strong results. Others struggling. But something else caught her attention. Promotion records. She flipped through several pages. The pattern appeared slowly. Same thing. Again and again. High performance. Low promotion rates. Several names highlighted in red. Alicia looked closer. Most of them belonged to Black employees. Her jaw tightened. A chair rolled softly beside her. A man in his early 30s leaned over the cubicle wall. You're the candidate, right? Alicia looked up. Yes. I'm Marcus. Alicia. Marcus lowered his voice. Whitmore give you busy work? Yes. Marcus sighed quietly. Sounds about right. Alicia glanced around. Does he treat everyone this way? Marcus hesitated, then shrugged. Depends. On what? Marcus looked toward Whitmore's office. Then back at Alicia. Depends who you are. Alicia watched his expression carefully. You mean performance level? Marcus shook his head slowly. No. Silence passed between them. Then Marcus added quietly. People around here notice patterns. Alicia asked softly. What kind of patterns? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead he leaned closer. You didn't hear this from me. I understand. Marcus spoke quietly. Whitmore doesn't like certain people rising too fast. Alicia held his gaze. Certain people. Marcus nodded. You're not the first candidate he's treated like this. Alicia felt her stomach tighten. How many? Marcus gave a small shrug. Enough. A voice suddenly echoed from down the hallway. Marcus. Marcus stiffened. Whitmore stood near his office door. Watching them. Marcus straightened immediately. Back to work, Whitmore said coldly. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. Whitmore's eyes moved to Alicia. He walked across the office floor slowly. Employees suddenly looked very busy. Whitmore stopped beside Alicia's desk. How's the analysis coming? Progressing. Whitmore glanced down at the papers. Then looked at her again. Good. He leaned closer. His voice dropped slightly. You seem determined to prove something. Alicia said calmly. I believe in doing work properly. Whitmore straightened. Just remember something. Alicia waited. Whitmore's eyes hardened. Ambition without awareness can damage a career. The message hung in the air. A quiet warning. Whitmore turned and walked away. The office slowly exhaled. Marcus whispered from the next cubicle. You see what I mean? Alicia nodded slowly. But something else caught her attention. Whitmore's office door remained slightly open. Inside, he was speaking on the phone. His voice carried faintly across the room. Alicia listened. No, she's still here, Whitmore said. A pause. Then he chuckled softly. Don't worry. Another pause. She'll never make leadership here. Alicia froze. The words echoed inside her mind. Across the office, Marcus heard it too. His eyes widened slightly. Neither of them spoke. Whitmore ended the call. His office door closed. Alicia slowly turned back to the papers in front of her. But the numbers no longer mattered. Because the pattern was no longer hidden. And tomorrow morning, Whitmore was about to learn what real leadership looked like. The office grew quieter after lunch. Phones still rang. Keyboards still clicked. But something about the energy had changed. Alicia Carter sat at the empty desk near the window, flipping slowly through the rest of the reports Whitmore had given her. The numbers didn't lie. But they didn't tell the full story either. She turned another page. Employee promotion history. Her eyes moved down the list. Dates. Departments. Performance scores. Then promotion decisions. Her brow tightened. Several names appeared again and again. High performance. Outstanding reviews. No promotion. She looked closer. 3 of the names had something else in common. All Black employees. Alicia leaned back in the chair. Her mind started connecting pieces. Marcus rolled his chair slightly closer from the next cubicle. You still working on Whitmore's little assignment? Alicia nodded. Yes. Marcus glanced at the papers. You're looking at the promotion records. You've seen them before? Marcus shrugged. Hard not to. Alicia tapped one of the names. Darius Coleman. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah. Top performance scores. Every year. Yet no promotion. Marcus leaned back. He left 6 months ago. Why? Marcus gave a short laugh. You already know why. Alicia kept her voice calm. Did he file a complaint? Marcus looked around the office. Then leaned closer. Yes. What happened? HR reviewed it. And? Marcus shrugged. They said there wasn't enough evidence. Alicia looked down at the file again. Did anyone speak for him? Marcus hesitated. People were careful. Careful. Marcus met her eyes. Careful about their jobs. Alicia understood. Fear had a quiet way of spreading. Another chair moved nearby. A woman with glasses stepped into the cubicle. Marcus. Marcus looked up. Yeah. Whitmore wants the quarterly reports. On it. The woman glanced at Alicia. You're the candidate. Yes. She gave a polite smile. I'm Lena. HR. Alicia nodded. Nice to meet you. Lena's eyes briefly moved to the promotion files. Her expression shifted slightly. You're reviewing those? Whitmore's voice suddenly echoed from down the hallway. Lena. Lena straightened. Yes, sir. Whitmore stepped out of his office. His gaze moved across the cubicles. It stopped on Alicia, then on the files in front of her. His eyes narrowed slightly. What are you looking at? Alicia answered calmly. The documents you gave me. Whitmore walked closer. His steps were slow, measured. He picked up one of the pages. This section isn't relevant to your task. Alicia tilted her head slightly. It's inside the folder. Whitmore gave a tight smile. Sometimes information can be misinterpreted. Alicia held his gaze. Data is usually straightforward. Whitmore leaned down slightly. His voice lowered. You're new here. That's true. There are internal dynamics you wouldn't understand yet. Alicia folded her hands calmly. Then perhaps someone should explain them. Whitmore studied her carefully. Employees nearby pretended not to listen. But everyone was listening. Whitmore straightened again. Lena. Lena looked up quickly. Yes. Why are these files accessible? Lena hesitated. They're part of the departmental review packet. Whitmore's expression hardened. That packet wasn't meant for candidates. Alicia spoke quietly. You gave it to me. Whitmore looked back at her. For a moment his control slipped. Just slightly. Then his smile returned. Yes. But clearly some sections were included by mistake. He took the promotion records from the desk, stacked them neatly, and slid them back into the folder. Let's focus on your assignment. Alicia nodded slowly. Of course. Whitmore looked around the office. His voice grew louder. Everyone back to work. Employees quickly turned to their screens. Whitmore turned back to Alicia. You're still here? Yes. Whitmore checked his watch. I assumed the rejection email would have been enough. The room went silent. Marcus froze in his chair. Alicia stayed calm. I haven't received one yet. Whitmore shrugged. You will. His tone carried quiet certainty. Then he added, You're capable. Alicia said nothing. Whitmore continued. But leadership requires more than capability. Alicia asked evenly. What does it require? Whitmore looked directly at her. Fit. The word hung in the air. Alicia leaned back slightly. And you've already decided I don't fit. Whitmore gave a polite smile. I've been doing this a long time. Alicia held his gaze. So your judgment is final? Whitmore nodded. Yes. Alicia stood slowly. Marcus watched nervously. So the decision has nothing to do with performance. Whitmore's smile faded slightly. Careful. With what? Whitmore's voice cooled. Implications. Alicia tilted her head. I'm only asking questions. Whitmore stepped closer. His voice dropped low enough that only Alicia could hear. Let me give you some advice. Alicia waited. Ambition is admirable. Another pause. But pushing too hard can close doors. Alicia met his eyes. Doors that shouldn't be closed in the first place? Whitmore's jaw tightened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Whitmore stepped back. Well, he adjusted his jacket. Finish your report. Alicia nodded calmly. Of course. Whitmore turned and walked back toward his office. But before he entered, he stopped. And looked back at her. You seem determined. Alicia said nothing. Whitmore added coldly. But determination doesn't change reality. Then he closed the office door. The room stayed silent for several seconds. Marcus slowly leaned toward Alicia. Did he just reject you again? Alicia nodded. Marcus shook his head. Unbelievable. Alicia looked back down at the folder in front of her. But the promotion records were gone now. Hidden again. Buried where they couldn't cause trouble. Marcus whispered, "What are you going to do?" Alicia didn't answer immediately. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. A message from Margaret Liu. Executive meeting confirmed. All regional leadership required. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Alicia slowly locked the phone. Marcus watched her. "Well." Alicia closed the folder. Her voice was quiet. "Tomorrow morning." Marcus leaned closer. "What?" Alicia looked toward Whitmore's office door. "We'll see how confident he really is." The executive boardroom sat on the top floor of Northbridge headquarters. Glass walls. Long black conference table. City skyline stretching across the windows. At 8:55 a.m., executives began arriving. Low conversations filled the room. Chairs scraped softly across the floor. Laptops opened. Coffee cups set down. No one seemed nervous. Except one man, Daniel Whitmore. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit and glanced around the table. "Unusual turnout today," he said. A regional finance manager shrugged. "Board requested full leadership attendance." Whitmore frowned slightly. "For what?" "No idea." Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "Probably merger paperwork." Across the room, another executive nodded. "Yeah, Carter Strategic finalized the acquisition last night." Whitmore waved a dismissive hand. "Financial restructuring. Nothing operational." The door opened. A woman stepped inside. Confident posture. Sharp eyes. Margaret Liu. The room quieted immediately. Whitmore stood politely. "Good morning, Ms. Liu." Margaret nodded. "Good morning, everyone." She placed a thin folder on the table. "Thank you for coming on short notice." Executives exchanged curious glances. Whitmore folded his arms. "Is this about the merger?" Margaret smiled slightly. "Yes." Whitmore relaxed. "Thought so." Margaret looked around the room. The merger with Carter Strategic Holdings officially closed yesterday evening. Several managers nodded. Whitmore spoke confidently. "Our departments are prepared for financial integration." Margaret raised one finger. "There is also a leadership update." Whitmore frowned slightly. "What kind of update?" Margaret walked slowly toward the head of the table. The board reviewed operational performance across all regional divisions. Whitmore straightened his posture. "Our region has exceeded revenue targets." Margaret nodded. "Yes." Whitmore smiled faintly. "Then I assume this meeting is procedural." Margaret looked toward the door. "Not exactly." The room turned silent. Whitmore noticed the shift. His eyes followed Margaret's gaze toward the entrance. The door opened again. Footsteps echoed across the floor. Whitmore's eyes widened. Alicia Carter walked into the room. She wore a navy blazer. Calm expression. No visitor badge. Whitmore blinked. "What is she doing here?" No one answered. Alicia walked to the empty chair beside Margaret. Then turned toward the room. Whitmore leaned forward. "This is an executive meeting." Margaret raised a hand. "Daniel." Whitmore stopped speaking. Margaret's voice remained calm. "I'd like to introduce someone." Whitmore looked confused. Margaret gestured toward Alicia. "This is Alicia Carter." Whitmore frowned. "Yes, I know who she is." Margaret continued. "She represents Carter Strategic Holdings." The room murmured quietly. Whitmore looked from Alicia to Margaret. "And?" Margaret opened the folder on the table. "As of yesterday evening, Carter Strategic became the majority stakeholder in Northbridge." Whitmore nodded. "Yes, I'm aware." Margaret's eyes moved across the room. "Which means the board has appointed new operational leadership." Whitmore's smile faded slightly. "What do you mean?" Margaret spoke clearly. "The board has created the position of Executive Director of Regional Operations." Whitmore's brow tightened. "That position already exists." Margaret shook her head. "No." Whitmore leaned forward. "I oversee regional operations." Margaret held his gaze. "You oversee a division." Silence spread across the room. Margaret continued calmly. "The executive director will oversee all regional leadership, including yours." Whitmore stared at her. "Who is this director?" Margaret turned toward Alicia. "Alicia Carter." The room froze. Whitmore's chair creaked as he leaned back. "What?" Margaret repeated it calmly. "Alicia Carter is now executive director of regional operations." Whitmore laughed once. A short, disbelieving sound. "This is a joke." No one laughed. Whitmore looked around the table. Someone explain this. Margaret spoke quietly. The board voted unanimously. Whitmore's eyes moved to Alicia. You applied for a job here yesterday. Alicia nodded calmly. Yes. Whitmore shook his head. That's impossible. Margaret said nothing. Whitmore leaned forward again. You interviewed with me. Yes. You were a candidate. Yes. Whitmore's voice grew louder. So how exactly does a rejected candidate become my boss overnight? The room stayed silent. Alicia spoke for the first time. Technically. Whitmore looked at her sharply. I was never a candidate. Whitmore stared. You sat in my office. Yes. You gave me your resume. Yes. Whitmore slammed his hand lightly on the table. Then what was that? Alicia answered calmly. An observation. Whitmore blinked. Observation. Alicia folded her hands. The board wanted to understand leadership culture inside this region. Whitmore's stomach tightened. And Alicia met his eyes. I wanted to see how leaders behave when they believe someone has no authority. Whitmore's voice dropped. You tested me. Alicia didn't deny it. Whitmore laughed again, this time more sharply. You applied for a fake job, to spy on leadership? Margaret corrected him. To evaluate it. Whitmore turned toward her. This is ridiculous. Margaret remained calm. Is it? Whitmore looked back at Alicia. His voice hardened. You think one interview gives you the right to judge me? Alicia tilted her head slightly. It wasn't just the interview. Whitmore's jaw tightened. What else? Alicia glanced around the room. Yesterday I also reviewed internal promotion records. Whitmore's stomach dropped. The promotion files. His eyes narrowed. You weren't authorized to see those. Alicia spoke evenly. They were inside the folder you gave me. Whitmore clenched his jaw. That was a mistake. Alicia nodded slowly. Perhaps. The room grew tense. Whitmore leaned forward again. You're telling me that because of one misunderstanding. Alicia interrupted quietly. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Whitmore froze. Alicia's voice stayed calm. It was a pattern. Silence spread across the boardroom. Whitmore looked around the table. Executives avoided his eyes. Margaret closed the folder in front of her. Which brings us to the next item on the agenda. Whitmore's chest tightened. What item? Margaret spoke clearly. The board will now review concerns regarding leadership conduct within this region. Whitmore stared at her, then slowly turned back toward Alicia. For the first time since she walked into the room, he looked uncertain, and Alicia realized something. Yesterday, Whitmore believed he controlled the room. Today, he wasn't even sure where the exits were. The boardroom felt smaller now. No one moved. No one reached for their coffee. The skyline outside the glass windows looked distant and quiet, but inside the room the tension was thick. Daniel Whitmore slowly leaned back in his chair. His eyes stayed locked on Alicia. So, he said, his voice controlled, this is how it's going to be. Alicia didn't answer immediately. Margaret Liu folded her hands calmly. Whitmore looked around the table. You bring in a new executive, set up some kind of secret test, and suddenly my leadership is under review? Margaret spoke evenly. The board reviews leadership performance regularly. Whitmore shook his head. This isn't regular. His eyes moved to Alicia again. This is personal. Alicia finally spoke. No. Whitmore leaned forward. It feels personal. Alicia's voice stayed steady. Then perhaps you should ask yourself why. Whitmore's jaw tightened. You interviewed for a job you never intended to take. Yes. You pretended to be a candidate. I observed leadership behavior. Whitmore scoffed. You sat in my office and wasted my time. Alicia tilted her head slightly. You dismissed me in less than 15 minutes. Several executives shifted in their seats. Whitmore noticed. His voice sharpened. That interview had nothing to do with bias. Alicia met his eyes. You told me leadership requires a certain presence. Whitmore shrugged. That's true. You also said people like me work better under direction. Whitmore hesitated. I said some personalities thrive in support roles. Alicia held his gaze. You said it while looking directly at me. Whitmore leaned back again. You're twisting words. Alicia didn't react. Instead, she opened a thin folder in front of her. The sound of paper sliding across the table was loud in the quiet room. What is that? Whitmore asked. Promotion records. Whitmore's stomach tightened. Alicia slid several pages across the table. Margaret glanced down at them. Other executives leaned closer. Alicia spoke calmly. These records show employee promotion decisions over the past 3 years. Whitmore folded his arms. So, Alicia tapped one page. Several employees with top performance scores were repeatedly denied advancement. Whitmore shrugged. Promotion decisions involve many factors. Alicia nodded. Yes. She tapped another page. Performance. Another page. Leadership evaluations. Another page. Department needs. Whitmore gave a tight smile. You seem familiar with corporate structure. Alicia ignored the comment. However, there is another pattern. Whitmore said nothing. Alicia continued. Most of the employees denied promotion share something in common. Whitmore leaned forward. And what would that be? Alicia looked directly at him. They are black. The word hung in the air. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Whitmore's face hardened. That's a serious accusation. Alicia remained calm. It's an observation. Whitmore shook his head. You're drawing conclusions from numbers. Alicia turned another page. Darius Coleman. Whitmore blinked slightly. Who? Senior analyst. Top performance scores for 4 consecutive years. Whitmore shrugged. I don't remember every employee. Alicia slid another document forward. His resignation letter. Margaret picked it up. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. Whitmore crossed his arms. People resign all the time. Alicia spoke quietly. He wrote that he felt leadership opportunities were systematically denied. Whitmore's voice grew sharper. People say things when they're frustrated. Alicia nodded slightly. Yes. She turned another page. Then there's Tanya Brooks. Whitmore's jaw tightened. She left last year. Alicia nodded. She also filed a complaint with HR. Whitmore looked toward the HR representative sitting near the end of the table. Lena shifted uncomfortably. Whitmore spoke quickly. That complaint was reviewed. Alicia looked at Lena. Was it resolved? Lena hesitated. Whitmore cut in. There was no evidence of discrimination. Alicia's eyes stayed on Lena. Lena spoke quietly. The complaint couldn't be substantiated. Whitmore nodded sharply. Exactly. Alicia leaned back slightly. Because witnesses refused to speak. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. You're making assumptions. Alicia turned one final page. Actually. She slid another document toward Margaret. This is an internal survey conducted by HR. Margaret read the title aloud. Employee Leadership Trust Report. Whitmore frowned. That survey was confidential. Alicia nodded. It was. Margaret looked up slowly. 70% of respondents reported feeling that advancement decisions were unfair. Whitmore shifted in his chair. Employee surveys are emotional. Alicia said quietly. 70% is not emotion. Whitmore leaned forward again. Are you accusing me of discrimination? Alicia met his eyes. I'm asking questions. Whitmore's voice grew louder. This is outrageous. Margaret raised a hand calmly. Daniel. Whitmore stopped speaking. Margaret's voice stayed steady. The board takes these concerns seriously. Whitmore looked around the table. You're going to believe survey data over leadership judgment? Margaret shook her head slightly. We're going to investigate. Whitmore froze. What? Margaret continued. Effective immediately, the board will review your conduct as regional operations director. Whitmore's face flushed. You can't suspend someone based on speculation. Alicia spoke calmly. No one said suspension. Whitmore looked at her sharply. Then what are you saying? Alicia folded her hands on the table. Her voice was quiet, but clear. We're saying the investigation begins now. Whitmore stared at her. His confidence wavered for the first time. Margaret glanced toward the door. Then she said calmly, Please come in. The boardroom door opened. 2 security officers stepped inside. Whitmore's chair scraped loudly against the floor. What is this? Margaret looked directly at him. This is procedure. Whitmore's voice rose. You're escorting me out? Margaret spoke quietly. We're ensuring the investigation proceeds without interference. Whitmore looked around the room. Executives avoided his eyes. Finally, he looked back at Alicia. Yesterday he had dismissed her. Today, security stood behind him. And Alicia realized something. Whitmore was finally experiencing something he had forced others to feel for years. Power leaving the room. The boardroom door closed behind the security officers. For a moment no one spoke. Daniel Whitmore remained standing beside his chair. His face was tight with anger. "You can't seriously be doing this," he said. Margaret Liu didn't raise her voice. "We are." Whitmore laughed once. A short, bitter sound. "You're humiliating a senior director because of some complaints and one staged interview." Alicia watched him carefully. His confidence was cracking, but it hadn't disappeared. Whitmore turned toward the executives sitting around the table. "You all know how leadership works." No one answered. Whitmore pointed at the reports in front of them. Performance numbers. Department targets. Results. His voice grew sharper. "My division delivered all of them." A finance manager shifted in his chair. "That's not the only measure of leadership." Whitmore snapped his head toward him. "Oh, really?" The man hesitated. Whitmore turned back toward Alicia. "You think a spreadsheet tells you how a company runs?" Alicia answered calmly. "No." Whitmore spread his hands. "Exactly. People do." Whitmore stopped talking. Alicia continued. "And people are the ones who raised concerns." Whitmore scoffed. "Disgruntled employees." Alicia shook her head. "Former employees." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Same thing." Alicia slid another document across the table. Margaret picked it up. "What's this?" "Exit interview summaries." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You've been digging through company records." Alicia ignored the comment. Margaret read quietly for a moment. Then her expression changed. She passed the document to another executive. The man read it. Then another. Whitmore watched their reactions carefully. "What does it say?" No one answered. Whitmore's patience snapped. "Someone speak." Margaret looked up. Multiple employees reported concerns about promotion fairness. Whitmore rolled his eyes. "We already discussed that." Margaret continued. "They also reported feeling discouraged from raising those concerns." Whitmore folded his arms. "Anonymous complaints." Alicia spoke quietly. "Some were not anonymous." Whitmore looked at her sharply. "What are you implying?" Alicia turned toward the far end of the table. "Marcus Reed." Whitmore frowned. The door opened. Marcus stepped inside slowly. He looked nervous. Whitmore stared at him. "What is this?" Marcus swallowed. Margaret gestured toward an empty chair. "Please sit." Marcus sat down carefully. Whitmore shook his head. "This is absurd." Alicia looked at Marcus gently. "You worked under Mr. Whitmore for 3 years." Marcus nodded. "Yes." Whitmore leaned forward. "Be very careful what you say next." Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Daniel." Whitmore fell silent. Alicia spoke softly. "Marcus, you can speak freely here." Marcus looked around the table. Then at Whitmore. Whitmore's stare was cold. Marcus looked back at Alicia. "You asked about promotion patterns." Alicia nodded. "Yes." Marcus took a slow breath. "I saw people get passed over." Whitmore laughed sharply. "Because they weren't ready." Marcus shook his head. "They were ready." Whitmore's voice rose. "You're not part of the leadership review process." Marcus spoke louder now. "I watched 3 people with perfect evaluations get denied promotion." Whitmore pointed at him. "You're guessing at decisions you don't understand." Marcus met his eyes. "I understand enough." The room went silent. Whitmore turned toward the executives again. "This is what happens when employees misunderstand leadership decisions." Another voice spoke quietly. "I didn't misunderstand." Everyone turned. Lena from HR was speaking. Whitmore stared at her. "You too." Lena nodded slowly. "I handled several complaints." Whitmore's voice hardened. "And none were proven." Lena hesitated. "Because employees were afraid." Whitmore slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous." Alicia didn't raise her voice. "It's testimony." Whitmore turned toward her again. "You set this up." Alicia answered calmly. "No." Whitmore leaned forward. "You manipulated this entire situation." Alicia shook her head. "You created it." Whitmore laughed again. "You think this room proves something?" Alicia didn't answer. Whitmore continued. "I built this division." His voice grew louder. "I hired most of the people sitting out there." He pointed toward the office floor beyond the glass walls. "They trust my leadership." Alicia looked at him quietly. "Do they?" Whitmore froze. Because at that moment, people outside the glass walls were watching. Employees had gathered in small groups. Whispering. Observing. Whitmore noticed them. His confidence wavered again. "They shouldn't be out there," he muttered. Margaret spoke calmly. "They're employees." Whitmore's voice lowered. "This meeting is private." Margaret folded her hands. Leadership behavior rarely stays private. Whitmore looked back at Alicia. You're enjoying this? Alicia shook her head slowly. No. Whitmore's voice dropped. Then why are you doing it? Alicia met his eyes. Because leadership affects real lives. Whitmore stared at her. For the first time, he had no response. Margaret glanced toward the security officers standing near the door. Then she spoke quietly. Daniel Whitmore. Whitmore looked up. Effective immediately. A pause filled the room. You are placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation. Whitmore stood frozen. You're removing me. Margaret nodded. For now. Whitmore looked around the room one last time. No one defended him. No one spoke. Finally, his eyes returned to Alicia. Yesterday he had dismissed her. Today, his authority had collapsed in front of the entire company. And as security stepped closer, Whitmore realized something he had never expected to feel. For the first time in years, he had no control over what happened next. The boardroom felt quieter after Daniel Whitmore left. The door had closed behind him. The echo of his footsteps faded down the hallway. Inside the room, no one spoke for several seconds. Margaret Liu slowly removed her glasses. Well, she said softly, that was revealing. Several executives shifted in their seats. The tension hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed. Alicia Carter remained calm. But inside, she felt the weight of the moment. Years of quiet decisions. Years of small injustices. All beginning to surface. Margaret looked toward the HR representative. Lena. Lena straightened slightly. Yes. Begin compiling all internal complaints related to promotion reviews. Lena nodded. I already started. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You expected this outcome? Lena hesitated. I suspected it. Across the table, a senior manager spoke quietly. How far back should we review? Margaret didn't hesitate. 5 years. The man nodded slowly. That could involve dozens of cases. Alicia spoke calmly. Then we review dozens of cases. No one argued. Margaret looked around the table. The board will appoint an independent investigation team. Another executive asked carefully. External? Yes. The word carried weight. External investigators meant the company was taking the matter seriously. Margaret turned to Alicia. As executive director, the investigation will report directly to you and the board. Alicia nodded. I understand. Marcus sat quietly at the end of the table. He still looked nervous. Margaret noticed. Marcus. He looked up quickly. Yes. Thank you for speaking today. Marcus shrugged slightly. I just told the truth. Alicia gave him a small nod. That's all we needed. Marcus stood slowly. If there's nothing else, I should get back to work. Margaret smiled faintly. Of course. Marcus walked toward the door. Before leaving, he glanced back at Alicia. There was relief in his eyes. The door closed behind him. One of the executives leaned forward. This investigation could attract attention. Margaret nodded. It probably will. Another manager frowned. If former employees speak publicly. Alicia finished the sentence quietly. Then the company will answer publicly. Silence settled over the room. Margaret studied Alicia carefully. You're prepared for that? Alicia didn't hesitate. Yes. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Good. Across the table, Lena spoke again. There's something else. Everyone looked at her. What? Margaret asked. Lena took a breath. This morning I received an email from a former employee. Alicia tilted her head slightly. Who? Darius Coleman. The name hung in the air. The same name Alicia had mentioned earlier. What did he say? Margaret asked. Lena glanced at her tablet. He heard about the leadership change. And, Lena hesitated. He asked if the company is finally ready to listen. No one spoke for a moment. Alicia looked down at the table. Then said quietly, Yes. Margaret nodded. Invite him to speak with the investigators. Lena typed a note quickly. Across the room, another executive cleared his throat. There's another issue we should consider. Margaret looked at him. What issue? The media. Alicia's eyes lifted slightly. What about it? The executive spoke carefully. If word spreads about a discrimination investigation inside the company, reporters will start asking questions. Margaret nodded slowly. That's likely. The man continued. Have we prepared a response? Alicia answered calmly. Yes. Everyone looked at her. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You have. Alicia nodded. The truth. The room stayed quiet. Margaret smiled faintly. That's a refreshing strategy. A soft knock sounded on the boardroom door. Lena opened it slightly. A young assistant stood outside. Yes? Lena asked. There's someone asking to speak with the leadership team. Who? The assistant hesitated. A journalist. The room grew still. Margaret leaned back slowly. That didn't take long. The assistant added quietly. She says she's investigating promotion bias inside Northbridge. Alicia stood. Margaret looked at her. You want to speak with her? Alicia nodded. Yes. Margaret studied her expression. You understand what that could start. Alicia looked toward the windows overlooking the office floor. Employees were still gathered in small groups. Watching. Waiting. She turned back to the table. Her voice stayed calm. Accountability doesn't work in silence. Margaret nodded slowly. Very well. Alicia walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. For a moment, she remembered the interview room. Whitmore leaning back in his chair. His voice calm. Some people simply don't command authority. Alicia opened the door. Outside, a woman stood holding a notebook and recorder. Miss Carter, the journalist asked. Yes. I'm Rachel Hayes from the Tribune. Alicia nodded politely. What can I do for you? Rachel raised her recorder slightly. We've received information suggesting Northbridge may have a pattern of discriminatory promotion decisions. Alicia met her eyes. The hallway behind them was quiet. The entire company seemed to be listening. Rachel asked one final question. Is the company investigating those claims? Alicia didn't hesitate. Yes. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Can you confirm whether any leadership members are involved? Alicia paused, then answered calmly. The investigation has already begun, and somewhere inside the building, Daniel Whitmore was realizing that the story he thought he controlled was no longer his to tell. The investigation took weeks. But for Alicia Carter, every day felt urgent. She moved through the office with calm precision, reviewing files, interviewing former employees, and coordinating with the independent team Margaret Liu had appointed. Every record confirmed a pattern, not just isolated incidents. Systemic bias, subtle microaggressions, silent discouragement, denials masked as business judgment. By the second week, Whitmore had been restricted from all operational areas. He spent hours in his office, quietly fuming. Calls went unanswered. Meetings happened without him. Employees whispered when his name came up. Alicia watched the floor with careful observation. Some faces were relieved, others cautious, but all seemed to sense the shift. One afternoon, Marcus approached her quietly. You're really holding everything together. Alicia gave a small smile. It's not just me. People are finally speaking. Marcus nodded slowly. They're scared, but they're also hopeful. Alicia's gaze swept the room. The quiet resilience of the staff surprised her. Small acts of courage had been happening behind closed doors for years. Now they finally had a chance to surface. Margaret Liu called Alicia into the boardroom that afternoon. Good news, she said softly, closing a thick folder. Alicia raised an eyebrow. The investigation has concluded. Margaret glanced around to ensure privacy. Whitmore has been found responsible for biased promotion practices and creating a work environment that discouraged reporting misconduct. Alicia's eyes narrowed slightly. Consequences? Margaret nodded. Termination. Effective immediately. Whitmore's reaction came through HR almost simultaneously. He had requested a private meeting with the board. He had nothing to say that could change the decision. No amount of charm, rationalization, or intimidation worked. Alicia stepped onto the office floor the next morning. Employees gathered quietly. Some hesitant, some smiling softly. She cleared her throat. Today marks a new chapter at Northbridge. Heads turned. She continued. We've all seen what happens when bias goes unchallenged. It affects careers. It affects lives. But we also see what happens when people speak up. When leadership listens. We can't erase the past, but we can choose fairness moving forward. Marcus stepped closer, giving a subtle nod of support. Employees murmured quietly, but there was a noticeable lift in the room's energy. That afternoon, Alicia walked past Whitmore's empty office. The door was locked. A note taped to the inside read, "Do not disturb." She paused for a moment. No triumph. No celebration. Just the quiet acknowledgement that justice had been served. She thought about Darius Coleman, Tanya Brooks, and all those whose voices had been silenced for years. Soon, they would hear from the company that their experiences mattered. Margaret Liu called Alicia back into her office. "You handled this with clarity," she said. Alicia shook her head. "Not clarity. Observation. Listening. Following evidence." Margaret smiled faintly. "There's a difference." Alicia considered that. "Yes. Observation alone is passive. Action transforms it." The next week, official announcements were sent. HR updated promotion guidelines. Training programs emphasized inclusivity. Leadership reviews became more transparent. Employees could speak freely without fear of retaliation. Even some who had left years ago returned to consult, sharing insights and rebuilding trust. Alicia watched it unfold, quietly proud. But the work was far from over. Justice had been served, but the emotional cost remained. Whispers about the past lingered. Memories of intimidation, dismissal, and subtle prejudice were slow to fade. She met Marcus in the hallway. "Feels different now," he said softly. "Yes," Alicia admitted. "But not perfect." Marcus nodded. "Still, you changed the course." Alicia smiled faintly. Sometimes change begins with one person asking the right questions. Across the office, employees resumed their work. Laughter returned in small bursts. Confidence grew in quiet gestures. And somewhere on the city streets below, Whitmore's reputation quietly unraveled. He had controlled the narrative for years. But no one listened anymore. Alicia stepped into her office, closing the door behind her. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility and relief. The files, the reports, the surveys, they all told one story. A story of systemic injustice, but also of resilience, courage, and accountability. She placed a hand on the desk, looking out the window at the skyline. The rain from weeks ago had cleared. Sunlight reflected off the glass towers, sharp and clear. For Alicia, the lesson was simple. Power is temporary. Integrity lasts. And though the scars of injustice remained, the future had shifted. Northbridge would never be the same. And neither would she. Because sometimes the greatest victories are measured not by the absence of conflict, but by the justice that follows it. The office hummed quietly. Life resumed. But now it did so under the watchful eyes of leadership that had been tested, and had emerged resilient, fair, and accountable. And in that moment, Alicia Carter allowed herself one small, quiet smile. The world had finally listened. And tomorrow it would keep listening.